At some point in every wargamer's life comes an unavoidable urge. The table will look so much cooler with a serpentine snaking, gravity-defying, rules-unsupported, modular river. A series of river-shaped tiles is one of my least favorite tabletop features, visually. Contradictory to real life, because of necessity, the water must float on top of the ground. Or you'd have to canal your living room table. The water must then be contained by elevated earth, or it would look silly. I mean, the water would go everywhere. And this is what I don't like the look of. Yet, I want one. My plan was to do a simple, everyone can do this at home, quote-unquote, river, using plastic card sheets, packaging foam banks, and toilet paper water effects. Yeah, I saw a video by a Swedish miniature railway enthusiast called Marklin of Sweden. He's got a pretty neat papier-mâché type trick to make pretty convincing water effects using white glue, toilet paper, and varnish. Well worth checking out. By accident, I went into a hardware store. As it turns out, I did not come back out with plastic card and toilet paper. Plexiglas is rather expensive, but I found these sheets in the same section, a lot cheaper. They were labeled hobby glass. Why this drastic change? Well, in short, my eyes saw clear plastic sheets 2 mm thin and thought, a transparent surface. That's kind of like water, that is. What if I just paint on a river on the underside and I'll be done with a river in time for lunch? Yeah, not really. Turns out this crafting stuff is a lot like painting minis. It takes time and there's plenty of mistakes to make along the way. But in the end, this was a nice, long weekend project. Borrowing my dad's workshop while spending midsummer out in the Swedish countryside, midsummer, by the way, is a pagan holiday when most Swedes feast on pickled herring while teaching their kids to dance like frogs round a huge leaf and flower-clad phallus symbol. Yeah, anyway, I do want to mention that I did pack a lot of stuff in a box. Paints and glue and all that, but forgot all the safety equipment, the respirators, the safety goggles. The result is me doing all kinds of irresponsible things throughout this video, and you should definitely not pay attention to those bits. I was a little smart, however. I did a test piece first to see if the polyurethane glue I bought, water activated, would firmly bond XPS foam to the hobby glass. Also a paint test to see not only what things might look like, but to see how the paint would stick. One with white glue mixed into the paint and one without. And everything did look quite promising. Without overthinking, I calculated the size of each modular segment, dividing the size of a regular Warhammer wargame board by a good-looking number for length, and letting one of my prefab bridges decide the width, resulting in roughly 12 times 5.5-inch segments. We'll get to the bridges later. Also, I cut out some smaller bits for curves. Personally, I don't really appreciate the sneaky S-curved style tiles, instead going for straight tiles. This also makes cutting the plexiglass a lot simpler. I know cutting sheets like this would be difficult for people who don't have access to circular saws, but this way, with straight tiles, if you could find someone to help out with the cutting process, it would be a very simple task for whoever is helping you out. To cut the 1 centimeter thick and 4 centimeter wide strips of XPS foam, I used this ancient wire cutter. I kind of wish I'd done them like 0.5 centimeter thick. Anyway, this could all be done with a sharp snap blade knife as well. The wire cutter just speeds up and simplifies the process. I roughen and sharpen all the edges apart from the end bits and the sides that are to be glued to the board, trying to create a simple rocky surface. And then I split the strips in half, making sure to start and stop exactly in the middle of the strip. 2 centimeters in. Doing snaking river shapes in between the two endpoints. If one is precise here with the endpoints, then all the tiles will match up. I was semi-successful at that. Oh, and I cut out holes for my bridges, too. The bridges and some more vintage-looking ruined bridge pieces are all filament printed on my Anycubic Viper filament printer. I've downloaded free-to-use STL files from my Thingiverse, mainly bridges for model railways, edited them and used different bits from different bridges, resulting in something I hope will work for a multitude of games. A big thank you to the creators of the original files. The paint job was fast and rough, relying on staining, scratching, rust and mold to create some visual interest rather than a glorious paint job. Got to admit, I kinda want a model railway now. With all my neatly arranged foam river ridges, it was time to prime black. When going heavy with regular rattle can primer on XPS foam, it will cause the foam to melt. I have, however, noticed that this water-based primer from Montana does not cause heavy melting. It does spray out rather indelicately and takes a long time to dry, but for something like this, it's perfect. Crafting projects seem to be a lot about waiting. Waiting for the paint or glue or clay or putty or plaster to dry. Planning can definitely make the journey more pleasant. While my riverbanks were drying, I painted the river itself on the underside of the Plexi/Hobbyglas. I'm using craft paint, and I didn't have all that big a selection. Mixing a blue pigment with a yellow craft paint to get a green, I could then mix with a red to get a brown. Adding some black or white for darker or brighter shades. Yeah, I'm doing a brown, sort of spring flood style river. I kind of like that look, a matter of personal taste. You can do whatever color you like. The PVA glue didn't actually make the painted surface excessively more scratch resilient, but it did create a thicker, sludgy water-like flow to the paint. So I add probably 1 part white glue to 2 parts paint. I try to paint something that looks like flowing, churning water that is darker in the middle and brighter towards the banks, simulating the different depths of the river, constantly working while the paint is wet so that the different bright and dark tones mix nicely. There is some room for improvement here. To have brown craft paint and not mixes, having to stop halfway or running out of paint, forced to mix up a new batch, and it could be a difficult task to get the exact shade of brown on all the tiles. Also to have a plan of what the water at the ends of the tiles should look like. The ends that meet up with adjacent tiles. Maybe even pre-paint a short strip of water effect on Plexiglas and use that as a master. A master that all the other tile ends should try and mimic. All to get your water to match however you assemble your river on the table. I did none of the above. I then zenithal primed my riverbanks with a light grey while holding my breath for a very long time. I then painted the river tiles again. This made very little difference. There were some parts that were not covered completely on the first run. This second layer did cover those. But on the whole, the second layer made very little difference. So be warned, that first layer of water effect paint is the one that will be seen. Then started my little disaster. I'd bought some tile grout, again to make things easy. A zenithal prime on the XPS foam and then a bit of tile grout here and there for some rocky, earthy, sandy textures. I've watched all the pro crafters, and so when it was time to seal the tile grout in place, I mixed up some diluted PVA glue with isopropyl alcohol to aid surface tension things. When I sprayed it on, it didn't spray on, because it had turned into something like porridge, you know, the stuff you eat for breakfast if you're serious about life. I think this happens from time to time when painting minis as well. Not the porridge, but instead of stepping back, assessing the problem at hand, fixing the issues at the source, I did the opposite and marched right on into the fog, dribbling on my porridge. A better path would have been to fix the spray, get my measurements right, or use washing up liquid or airbrush flow improver to aid with surface tension. Instead, I made a big concrete mess that I brushed out and covered everything completely with. At least my riverbanks are now indestructible. But that zenithal prime was a waste of time. Once dry, I moved on and glued on all the ridges using the polyurethane glue. Now, the whole tile grout thing was an experiment and not something required. My ridges are sturdier, but anything goes. And on that note, anything goes for ridges. It would probably work well with sand glued right onto the plexiglass sheets, or cardboard, or foam core. Mine did, however, turn out awfully uniform, and there was a lot of brush strokes in the grout. So I did a second attempt. Using watered-down PVA glue, some water-based varnish and some washing-up liquid to spray on and seal the new layer of grout. This is what I should have done from the start. For good looks, I spray painted all the undersides in a dark grey. Lovely colour, this. Great modern warfare grey. That I wasted on the underside of some water tiles. Part of me wishes I would have stopped here. The clear plastic surface looks quite stylish, and I think the water effect works. But I went ahead and added some moving water effects. Well, first I did some simple, detailed painting. Some of the glue had expanded too far, so I painted it to resemble sandy banks. And then a very quick dry brush of light grey and white on the rough, stony ground. Using gloss Mod Podge, or the craft store equivalent, glossy decoupage glue, painting on flowy brush strokes that when dry will be perfectly clear, but break the light in a way that makes for a respectable flowy water effect. This can be very useful on any water-like surfaces, like resin pours. And finally, Green Stuff World's Splash Gel. A white gel that somehow dries clear and in a manner that takes the shape of moving water. This stuff is great for larger ripples and more action-filled water. It especially looks great around these toppled old ruined bridge bits. I imagine these ruins, well, anything stuck in the water like this just sells the water effect, but I figured they could be used as river crossings in-game. Usually where you find water, you find life, growth, ultimately people and cities. My rather drab and bare build, well, I do like it, also because I could fit it into maybe more settings than if everything was just green foliage and bluish water, but I could stretch and add a tuft or two. Just a little more eye-catching, wouldn't you say? I must admit, I like it, within the limits of it being a modular river. I think lower ridges, and I would have liked it even more. The bridges really sell the concept. I imagine anything breaking the surface would. Rocks in the river with ripples around them, or other debris, or some type of reeds or similar. I even thought if one has the ability to draw, like on an iPad or similar, one could probably paint flowing water and glue a print of that on the underside of the plexi. I think there are quite a few possibilities here if one can just find a way to cut the plexi. Age of Sigmar does not have any rules for water. Kinda makes sense, as there are elves riding around on fish and turtles. It would be kinda silly if they couldn't cross water. And I mean, rats definitely swim, right? But I mean, there are a lot of other games around, and regardless, my table will just look a little more pretty now, if I so wish. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And please do consider supporting this channel by joining the Patreon. These videos would not be possible without your support. Truly. Bye.